because you should not be here. It's nice of you, but you have these people. I love them, but they work too much. They work too much. Well, I'm glad he's here for me. Speaking of me, I got a couple of things. Oh, I did need to. Jeff is home, and so we have to give Cindy some. She doesn't usually do the slides, so she. Next week. Now that I got word from Marcus that, you know Marcus Castile, the guy that's the head of the care center? Well, next week is the foundation board's meeting in 111. And there aren't that many of them. You know, 111 is just right straight here. It's just the room right straight ahead from when you come in. We can meet in there. We'll be around round tables and stuff. And we won't have all the technology that we normally have, but I would rather we meet, unless you're just all just wanting to be home to watch the election results. So I thought we would meet, but Marcus said that he had to talk to Brian Boone, who's the head of the foundation, about it, but he didn't see any problems. So I'm going to just go with what Marcus said, and we're meeting there. Because they'll still be tearing down the election in here. And I'm sure there'll be like thousands of people lined up to come in late, and to vote. Anyway, and I have one other thing to tell you. I think it's just one. Oh, I know you want me to get you out of here before 8 o'clock, right, Dad, so you can see the World Series. Yeah, so I am aware of that. How much you got on the Phillies this year? I'm kidding. It's my dad. Yesterday afternoon at 5 o'clock, I got a call from Barry Rodriguez. And he said to me, Tim, I was just talking to Marin, and she said that when you preach this weekend that they're trying to figure out what song to play for when you preach on the law and its emphasis on possessions and things like that. I said, yeah. And he said, well, actually, you're not supposed to preach on that subject. I'm preaching on that subject, and you're supposed to preach on Jesus and the possessions and things this weekend. So I was just about ready to send all the people we have to send all the stuff to when he told me that, which means the last evening I had to start over. And so I was up all night. I went to bed at like 10 and woke up an hour later and then was up all night working on this sermon. So you may get the best Tim you've ever had or the worst Tim you've ever had. But it's like I wasn't prepared for that. I'm fine with it. I don't know if any of you were any of you in my Matthew class? The notes from my Matthew class they're so good I don't have to do any exegetical. Just listen to me. They're really good exegetical notes. And so I just took my Matthew class notes. But it may be the worst or the best sermon I've ever given. I don't know. But my Deuteronomy sermon, it was really good. And I just pitched it, and my wife dug it out of the trash and she said it was good. So I don't know. Maybe someday I'll get to preach on it, but probably not. The next time we come around to doing Deuteronomy 14, I don't think I'll still be on staff. Let's just put it that way, if that makes any sense. So I'm ready. Let me think. Yeah, if you think of me, you might. I have to tell you that I'm a bit verklempt. One other thing before we go on, and I'm not going to talk about it tonight, but do you guys know that weird verse in Matthew where it says that at the time of Jesus' death that people rose up out of the graves and they walked around and, that verse? I figured it out. I know what it means. So someday, I figured it out. And it happened to me, it's terrible. during worship, during church this weekend, I was standing there and they're singing in one line, I don't even know what it was. And I went, wait a minute. And I put it all together and my wife was like, what's with you? And I was down there dinking around, looking up things on my phone and going through my Bible, and everybody else was singing something, and Tim had figured it out. So someday we'll talk about that. But guess what? It's related to the stuff we're talking about in the class right now. So it's cool. It actually makes sense. Not when I get to heaven, Jesus may say to me, you had that thing all wrong, but I'll take it. In the meantime, finally, it's one of the verses that I could never explain because it's only in one book. It's one sentence, and it doesn't seem to mean anything, but it does. So but I don't want to go into that because that's all I'd talk about tonight. So, but anyway, here we are. We're in chapter 13, and we're about to start with verse 32. Let me pray for us, and then I'll read a bit of it, and then we'll get into this. Okay, Father, what a joy it is to come before you. What an honor it is to have your word and to speak of you. I pray that what I say tonight will be something that you are pleased with, that our hearts will be moved by what we see tonight. And thank you for the truth that is found in these verses, the truth that you are in charge and that you have given us great hope that someday, we will all live under the rule of your gracious and powerful hand in ways that you intended us to live. And so, Father, thank you for that, and I pray that we'll leave here tonight hopeful. I pray in Jesus' name, amen. All right, I'm going to say that some people, and I'm going to start at verse 28, but some scholars in there, and they know what they're talking about. Do you guys know what a chiasm is? Have any of you heard me talk about chiasms before? I'm not getting a lot of heads shaking yes, so I'll just, a chiasm is a literary form where it goes like this. It talks about something A, then it talks about something B, then it talks about something C, and then it talks about something B, and then it talks about something A, if that makes sense. That it's a form where that's how it works. And to be perfectly honest, much of the Old Testament is massive chiasms. And the reason that the Jewish teachers and writers wrote in these sorts of forms was so it'd be easier for people to remember in an oral culture. This section, starting at verse 28 to the end, is a chiasm. Now, I'll tell you what the parts are. It goes in verse... let me tell you what the parts are, and you can see them as it comes together. First it goes a parable. There's a parable A, and I wish I'd have had time to give Cindy this earlier, but it goes, there's a parable. And then, then we get a statement about time. Then the C is a statement about the authority of Jesus. And then it goes back and we get a statement about time. And then we get a parable. So it goes parable, time, Jesus' authority, time, parable. Now follow this, just watch this. Now learn the lesson from the fig tree. The word parable is actually in there. It says in the Greek, it says, when its branches bud and its leaves begin to sprout, you know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see these things taking place, you can know that the return is near, right at the door. And I tell you that this generation will not pass from the scene before all these things take place. Heaven and earth will disappear, but my words will never disappear. Now, that statement right there is a statement about Jesus' authority. So we've already had a statement about time, or a parable, and then time. And then it goes, however, no one knows and here's where we're starting tonight. However, no one knows the day or the hour when these things will happen, not even the angels in heaven or the Son himself. Only the Father knows, since you don't know when that time will come. Be on guard and stay alert. The coming of man can be illustrated by a story of a man going on a long trip. When he left home, he gave each of his slaves instructions about the work they were to do. And he told the gatekeeper to watch for his return. Okay, did you see there it all was? That's a chiasm. Now, and then it says, you too must keep watch, for you don't know when the master of the household will return, in the evening, at midnight, before dawn, or at daybreak. Don't let him find you sleeping when he arrives without warning. I say to you what I say to everyone, watch for him. And we're going to stop there no matter what, if it gets past, I'm not going to keep going and going and going, but I'm not teaching past there because that will be the end of chapter 13, and we should actually break out the party balloons because it's been a long slug through here, and we go back into the narrative of the book when we go on. But did you see how that worked? Now, I just want to say that I am unclear if Jesus, as he was speaking this, or if Peter, as he told the story, maybe more Peter or Mark when he wrote it down, were concerning themselves with creating such a highly structured passage. But it is interesting that that's a really clear chiasm. And in an oral tradition, it would make it so much easier for people to remember the parts, because if they only have to remember parable, time, authority of Jesus, and then they can go, oh yeah, what's the next thing that comes? What's the next thing that comes? Scholars love to talk about these. They find them everywhere. Some of them have they go all the way up to letter X, if you can imagine it. And I don't think they're real. But the Jews really lean on this. And I just wanted you to know about it because this is considered one of the most obvious chiasms, which is a rabbinical teaching method. And here it is in this place, and I just want you to know about it. So you're probably thinking, Tim, but you're going to, now that I've said it, this is how it works. Now that I've said the word chiasm and talked to you about it, you're going to start hearing preachers use the word, and you'll hear it you know what I'm saying? Because I just had a guy that came up to me this weekend after I was thinking about this, and he said, do you believe that the story of Noah's Ark is a chiasm? I was like, what? Anyway, on we go. But the first verse here says, it says, however, no one knows the day or the hour when these things will happen, not even the angels or in heaven or the Son himself. Now, Jesus begins literally in the Greek by saying, concerning that day or hour. And literally in the Greek it says this, and this is almost impossible to say, concerning that, and then both day and hour are articulated, concerning that, the day, and the hour. I mean, nobody would say that. Concerning that, the day, and the hour. But what he's pointing to with the articulation is that these are specific moments. The day, and the hour that this is all going to happen. He's making sure that it's clear that Jesus is still answering the disciples' question about when is this going to happen. He's all this way into this discussion, but he's still thinking about that time when what? The temple will be destroyed. When things really come to a head. He says, considering that, what's he say? When these things will happen, by the way, there's these things again, these things. Not even the angels in heaven or the Son himself. No, okay. However, no one knows the day. Now, a little earlier, he said, that both the angels and the Son would have a role in what was going to happen. The angels were going to be involved in, you remember, gathering everyone from the corners of the earth. The angels are going to be involved in this. That's a big job. That's their job when they get told to go. And the Son is going to do what? He's going to come in what? On the clouds of heaven in the power and glory of the Father and Son. I mean, this is like a big thing. And yet Jesus says, but we don't know when this is going to happen. We don't even know. Now think about it a minute. The angels, as best as I can figure, have access to God's some space where God is present because they are his messengers. They are his worker bees. They do what he tells them to do. They have access to behind the scenes information, and that they don't even know. They don't know. They just have to be ready when the time comes to go do what they're told to do. And then Jesus himself says that I don't even know. I don't even know. Now, some scholars believe that the early church put these words in Jesus' mouth just to cover his backside, because he'd made some predictions about some things that were going to happen. And so rather than have Jesus predict things that didn't happen, they put these words in his mouth to say, well, I don't know. So nobody can say, you were wrong about that, Jesus. Now, let me just respond to that. And you may read that, or you may hear that, because it's a fairly common thing in what I would say last 2 centuries of theological work. When, what on earth why on earth would there be a necessity for the early church to protect Jesus' backside? Okay? The harder statement, and this is always true in looking at theological things, the harder the statement is, the harder it is to figure out why it would be there, is probably proof that it's real. Does that make sense? Because people are not going to make up stuff that makes the whole business more confusing. But if Jesus says, I don't even know when I'm coming back, it's probably because he doesn't even know when he's coming back. Because that's the harder statement, because he's Jesus. And he knew a lot of stuff he knew that Peter was going to deny him 3 times. He knew that fig tree was going to dry up from the roots. He knew all kinds of stuff. He knew that the woman at the well had been with 7 husbands. And the man she was with now is not even her husband. He knew that stuff. Why on earth would he say, I don't know, if he didn't know, if he knew? Does this make sense? Oftentimes, there are difficult statements. There are difficult statements in the Scripture, or things contradict other things in the Scripture. Like you'll get 2 blind men here and 1 blind man there. Does it make, you know what I'm talking about? You'll get these differences. Always lean into those as proof that they're probably original. Okay? Because no one edits or changes anything to make it more confusing or complicated. If it's there and it confuses things or makes you wonder why, because it doesn't make any sense on first blush, then it's probably true, real. Does that help? Does that make sense to you? This is just part of apologetics of the text. Jesus saying that he didn't know, I think it's probably good that Jesus doesn't know. Because I think, and I know this sounds really anthropomorphic, but Jesus is a guy. Can you imagine if he had a calendar and there was a date on there from his dad that said, by the way, don't do anything on October 32nd, 2063? He's like, why not, Dad? And he goes, well, we got a lot to do then. And so it would change his relationship with his people. I think that this is an interesting concept. I don't know what the angels are up to all the time. They're up to something. And by the way, don't mess with them if you run into one. They're not to be messed with. Every time we run into an angel in the Bible, they're like, do you know who I am? Wait a minute. I am so-and-so. Don't mess with me. And if they had it on their calendar, it would change their attitude towards what they're doing. So it's good that they don't know. I also know this, that there is the possibility that God can change his mind about things based on by what we're doing. God responds. So who knows? Maybe someday we'll have revival and God will put off that October, what did I say, 17th, 20, what did I say, 63? I don't know what I said. But anyway, who knows? Why? Because God does not want anyone to perish, but he wants all people to come to salvation. He's not slow, as other men might think he is slow. That's just interesting to me. Jesus, can you put the text back up for me, Cindy? He says, I don't even know. But this also then leads us to something else. He says, and since you don't know when the time comes, be on guard and stay alert. Actually, in the Greek, the be alert, be on guard and stay alert are first. This is one of those verses. Oh, let's see, how's it? Okay, there it is in the middle. I had to think a minute. Yeah, see how it was? Blepete, agripunete, that's you take heed. You watch. You see that ending, the TE ending on there? That's the imperative ending. And it's an order. Jesus is commanding. He's not being soft about this. He's going, boom, take heed. Watch. It's interesting in the various translations. I wrote down a bunch. They're in the notes. In the various translations, they go, here's a couple of them. Look, be wakeful, or be on guard, take heed, be on the alert. All these commands. Now, here's the deal. These are all commands that were given to doorkeepers. Wealthy houses had slaves, servants. By the way, anytime you run into servant or slave, it's the same word in the auth. The translator is deciding whether you're dealing with slaves or servants, okay? So it's like if they don't want to offend people with the word slave, but it's actually the word slave. Doorkeepers were like high point servants in a household. Their job was to they had the key to the house. The houses were walled. Have you ever been in a part of the world where the houses are walled? Have you been there? When I went to Nairobi to preach there one time, they put me in a place that was walled. And barbed wire around it. It was a house, but had a big wall and a guard at the door. And that's because why? You can't trust anybody. And in this world, they couldn't trust anybody. The doorkeeper was a very important servant in the household. He watched his job, and we all know that nobody can never sleep. I'm living proof right now. But we have to sleep sometime. But his job was to figure out how he could stay up all night and keep watch and still find ways to sleep and still run the whole show. And their job was to make sure that nobody came in and to make sure that none of the other servants went out stealing things. because it's just a completely different world. And a lot of times people in the household would steal things and sell them at night outside of the compound. Well, anyway, he says, since you don't know when the time is, you need to take heed and you need to watch. Now we're going to talk about, we're going to get to this parable in a minute, but this immediate command is exactly what they would say to a doorkeeper when he was given his job. You need to keep watch. You need to take heed because you don't know when that time is coming. And that's the truth for his job. His truth for his job. These guys were, and they were always guys, these guys were so well respected by their owners, if you will, that there are records of door watchmen. And remember, they're servants of door watchmen. Now, let me get this right. That their owners would make deals with other rich people to marry their daughters, free women, to their doorkeeper. You see what I mean? The doorkeeper is a slave, but he's so well respected and he's so good at what he does, and his owner has put so much honor on him that somebody else would be willing to marry their free daughter to him. This is very unusual, but this job would get that. We're going to have to talk about that in a little bit, but he says, since you don't know when, that time will come. Now, we're going to talk later about what they have to be watching for. There's a lot that they have to be watching for. There's not anybody coming to well, that's not true. You remember what Jesus said earlier about what we need to look out for? False teachers, people who claim to be the Messiah, people who fool even the elect, these kinds of things. This is what he's telling his disciples now that they need to look out for. They need to look out for these things. They need to be on the watch. Can you put the next verses up for me, Cindy? Is this all making sense? Have you catch it? I mean, I know it's kind of dry, but... And then Jesus goes, the coming of the Son of Man, that's him, can be illustrated by a story of a man going on a long trip. Now what he's going to do is he's going to give us a parable about this very thing that he's talking about. A couple of things. One of the great plots, if you will, of Jewish moral storytelling was the story of a man who goes away, and while he's gone, something happens. Either his people are faithful to him, like his wife is faithful to him, or his wife isn't faithful to him, or his doorkeeper is faithful to him, or this is a common motif. When he brings this up, they're going, oh no, not another story about that. Well, I don't think they really did that. But the truth is, you can find lots and lots of them. So he's not making up something that they wouldn't have known. And he says, the coming of the Son of Man is like unto a parable of a man going on a long trip. Now, I suppose people went on long trips in that day. But if you went on a long trip, you were going to be gone a long time. Because you know that most people never traveled more than 5 miles in any direction from their home in their entire lives. So if somebody went on a long trip and was going to be gone a while, it was a big deal. And it says, when he left home, he gave his slaves instructions about the work they were to do. The actual Greek says something more like, when he went away, he gave them, I've got it in the notes, a very terse statement about, he gave them their tasks. He gave everybody gets a job to do while I'm gone. And boy, do people take that as like what God does for us when he left the world and he gives us all tasks to do and we're all given a task. We'll talk about that later. He says, When he left home, he gave all of his slaves instructions about what they were going to do. And he told the gatekeeper to watch for his return. Now that is exactly what they would do. Now here's the thing. Almost nobody traveled at night. Night was a really, really, really dangerous time in their world. Have you ever been anywhere where there is no electricity and it's just dark? The whole world was without electricity. A torch was the best light you could have at night. People did not travel. He's going to talk about night later. But he's telling the gatekeeper to watch for his return because he doesn't know when it's going to be. Now later he's going to say it could be at these, and he's going to talk about night. What a responsibility. What a responsibility. Oh, are you putting... Okay, there it is. It is like a man going on a journey, having left his house and having given the servants of him authority. See the word authority? Exousia, that just means a job to do, your thing to do. And then it goes, to each one the work of him, and the doorkeeper he commanded that he should keep watch. You see how terse that is? As you look at that, and then you read what the NLT or whatever your translation is, you can see why people translating have to work really hard to make it be clear to us, because there's so much missing in the Greek that's assumed by the language that's not there. The coming of the Son of Man can be... Oh, is that... Oh, that's that passage again, yeah. You see how it says... He says the coming of the Son of Man. I don't even think that's in there in the Greek. Can you put that Greek back up there? It's not. It just goes... It's like a man going on a journey, having left the house of him. Now, think with me about this for a moment. Is it okay that the NLT said the coming of the Son of Man? There's no mention of that in the text. He just was talking about the day and the hour. We just said a few minutes ago that the day and the hour had to do with what? The destruction of the temple, we thought. And then they put in there the coming of the Son of Man. And then everybody just makes a sense, is thinking that this verse is about what? The return of Jesus. It didn't say that. It doesn't say that in the Greek. Is it okay that they put that in there? Because that's their theological position. I just want you to think about that. We have to wrestle with that. We have to wrestle with that sometime. But it's like a man going on a journey and having left the house. Whoa. Was that a subliminal thing to get us all love, grace there? Was that what that was? And having the servants of him, to each the work of him, their authority, and the doorkeeper commanded that he should keep watch. And there's that word again. But it's not in, there's no imperative there. Okay, now we have it set up. Now go to the next verse for us. After that one, Cindy. What? Can you go? Not in Greek, no, in just English. And then he goes, you too must keep watch. Why do they have to keep watch? Because you don't know when the master of the household will return. This is... Jesus doesn't know. He's talking about himself. He is the master of the household. You don't know when he's going to return. And then he says something very interesting. He goes, in the evening, at midnight, before dawn, or at daybreak. Now, that's not what it says in the Greek. What it is in the Greek is it's the 4 Roman watches. It goes, let me get it exactly right, okay? And I'm, where is that, man? Oh, here it is. They are late evening, midnight, the cock crowing, and early morn. These are the 4 watches of the night. They didn't have time. They thought that the cock crowing was right before the sun came up. Oddly, the Jews only had 3 watching, and the middle one was called the cock crowing, and it happened at 1:30 in the morning. Have you ever been someplace where there are roosters crowing all night? Yeah, in South Africa, the roosters crowed all night, every day. All night. I mean, you know what I'm saying? And so in some places, it's just weird. I don't know. Maybe they're just different kinds of chickens. But the Romans divided it up into 4 sections, and they're all at night. They're all in the space when nobody would normally come home, when nobody would expect anybody, especially somebody as prominent as the householder of this place, that he would be traveling and he would come in after dark because it's too dangerous. There are too many people out there who would want to rob him. It's too hard to see where you're going. It's all these things. And if the watchman knows that somehow gets a message that they're coming home at night, he's going to be at the door. He's going to be ready to protect them and get them inside and bring them home and all this stuff. He's going to be all about it. And Jesus uses now we don't know when he said this, whether he used the 4 Roman watches at night. What we do know is that the text was written for what? Roman people. The book of Mark was written for Roman people. He was asked by Romans to write the book. And so he uses these 4 watches. But the point isn't that it's a Roman watch. The point is that it's night. And that's when you least expect him to come back. That's the point. And so you have to be what? You have to be watching. You have to keep watching. He's saying that to his disciples. He says, don't let him... And we're going to get done here really quickly. Is this okay? I just hope this is helpful. I have some personal things to say about this in a moment, but he says, don't let him find you sleeping when he arrives without warning. Okay, first off, just stating that he's going to arrive without warning is one thing. Do any of you remember there's another story in the Bible that is about watchmen who fell asleep? It's the guys that were guarding Jesus' tomb. Now, they said, listen, the Jewish rulers said, listen, we want to pay you to say that you fell asleep and that the disciples came and stole his body while you were sleeping. Do you know what the penalty for being a Roman soldier guarding the tomb of a convicted criminal that the Romans had just put to death? For falling asleep while guarding that and allowing people to steal his body? It's you get to go in that tomb forever. It's death. And they said, and we'll tell everybody that it's okay that you fell asleep. And I'm sure they're like, what? Because they didn't know what happened. They got knocked out in some manner. Here, it's the same thing. You don't want to be caught sleeping when he arrives. Why? Because there's a great punishment that goes with this. There is a connection between doorkeepers and Jewish, how do I say it, understanding of the importance of the job. Now, this may seem weird, but I think it's in 1 Chronicles, and it's in the notes. There is a long section about the group of the Levites whose job it is to be the doorkeepers of the temple. When in Chronicles, people are being given their responsibility as the nation develops, there's a bunch of guys who are Levites, and remember, the Levites are the family who don't have any land. They just oversee the temple. They live off of the tithe from everybody else. And there's a group of them, one family, who is told, you have the sacred job of overseeing the door to the temple. And you don't let anything unclean in, and you don't let anything holy out. That you watch over the temple, and it says this is your task forever as a family. In the Jewish mind, because of this, they always were thinking of the role of a doorkeeper as both important but sacred. Does this make sense? Sacred. It's part of the fabric of their culture. Jesus starts talking about doorkeepers, and you need to be like a doorkeeper. You need to be somebody who is watching over what goes in and what comes out, and you need to make sure that you're ready for when the real arrival happens of the Son of Man. When that happens, it's a what kind of duty? It's a sacred duty. It's a sacred duty. This is all part of the story. This is all weaving in and out, and I'm sure that they're thinking very clearly about this. Those commands are not only to just be careful about things, but to stay awake. And not just half asleep awake, but like really knowing what's going on. Why? Because I've told you enough. This is what Jesus is saying. I've told you, you don't know exactly when the time is coming, but I've told you enough that you can put two and two together and know what you're supposed to be about. That's what he's saying. Now, of course, this is all getting complicated because are we talking about Jesus coming back in the future? Are we talking about what happened in the past? What are we talking about? Are we talking about both at the same time? What are we talking about? I don't know for sure. All I know is that Jesus was very emphatic about this, that his disciples were to pay attention and to watch for whose return? His. Now, we'll say that the preterists say that Jesus has come back many times, and so they don't have any trouble with this. But I'm unsure. I'm unsure that he's come back in that way. Can you put the text back up there for me? It says, don't let him find you sleeping when he arrives without warning. I say to you what I say to everyone. Watch for him. That's kind of what it says in the Greek. It says, this is what I say to all people, essentially what it says. What I say to all people. When he says that, then he enlarges his command. He's enlarged, right here. What now to you I say, to all I say. Watch. Now, and that's a command. And he's talking to disciples. And who does that include? Us. I don't know exactly how we live this out. I used to be very fearful of the return of Jesus because I was brought up in a soup that there was no other way to think about these verses. I can remember many times, you find this funny, Dad, but I'd get up in the morning and I couldn't find anybody. Of course, you know what I thought happened. The rapture had happened and I got left behind, Or that there was a great gathering somewhere of people and that I didn't get a call. I don't usually worry about that now. I'm pretty comfortable in my salvation. Does that make sense? It's like I'm not really worried about getting. But there's something very hopeful about living in a watchful attitude about the return of Jesus. I don't know what it's going to mean. I don't know how it's going to happen. But I know it is. It's the one thing there are two things I'm sure about from what Jesus taught us about himself in the future. One is there's a judgment. There is a judgment. I don't know what that looks like. But I got to tell you, when I saw my first VCR, I got real nervous because I thought, oh no, somebody can tape everything I'm doing. So all I could think of was, now they're going to just broadcast. We're just going to have a big screen, and they're going to slap a tape in there, and then I'm going to see, everyone's going to see my life. I don't know what that's going to be like, but there is judgment. And secondly, Jesus is going to come in power in some manner. He said he would. And the whole world's going to see it, and I don't know what that looks like. But that just gives me hope in the midst of all that we're living through now. And all that people have lived through over the centuries. Jesus has said he's coming. And he says to everyone, watch out. Look out for this return of the Son of Man. That's just a powerful thing. Now here, we take this whole thing, this whole passage, which we've been in chapter 13 for way too long. But what has he said? He said, okay, guys, I know this temple is really cool. You think it's amazing, and it was. But what's been happening inside of that temple and what has been coming out of that temple into the world is such that it does not deserve to exist as the house of God. In fact, there's another thing coming, and he doesn't say it in this passage, but there's going to be a new thing coming, and what it is that guess who gets to be the temple of the Lord? We do. It shifts from a space to a relationship within us. And of course the disciples get worked up and go, when's this going to happen? When's this going to happen? And he starts giving them ideas about it, but he says, you've got to be on guard against these things. That's why he continually tells them to watch out. These disciples are going to be what? They're going to be the leaders of the church when the day comes for him to leave, because he has to leave in order to come back. And he says, so you need to watch out for people who are charlatans and liars and frauds and all this. And they're going to do everything they can to do what? Take me off of my throne and replace me with themselves. And the earth is going to just rebel. There are going to be famines. There are going to be earthquakes. These things are happening because why? Because the earth, the system is broken. It's a reference of, it just references the sin that man has brought onto the world. And then when people start seeing things happen in the skies and all this stuff, they're going to say, it's almost over. Why? Because these things scare us. And they make us think there's no possible way that mankind can live through that. And yet what does he say? He says, don't get worked up about that. Don't get worked up about that either. It's just the start, the birth pangs of what's coming. And then he says, I've told you enough that you can see the signs, like with a fig tree that tells you summer's coming. Well, something's coming, but I don't know when it is. So you need to watch out and protect against those things. And you need to watch out because I might just show up unannounced in the middle of the night because my dad says, go, it's time to take names and finish this thing off. Because we've got a future that we planned a long time ago that we have been patiently waiting through while those people that we love are messing it up. And one of these days we're going to fix it so there's none of the problems that we have now. Now, this is cool, and it's hopeful. It's hopeful. That's what this whole chapter's about. If we don't think about it in the big picture like I just described it, then we get lost in the details and we forget that this is a hopeful passage and not a political passage. Does that make sense? It's prophecy, but it is not just foretelling, it is forthtelling the truth about God's heart, which is there will be a day when the Son of Man returns, and when he does, everyone will know because they'll see the glory of God and the power of God expressed in his return. Now, I don't know what that's going to be like. And I have to be honest that my Non-Christian friends would think I was crazy to talk like that. But I believe that it's a fact that somebody was crucified and he rose again from the dead 3 days later. I'll go to my death before I'll deny that happened. And the same man said this was going to happen, so I'm going to live in the hope of what he said rather than fret about it. I don't care if it's tomorrow or if it's in 10,000 years. It's the same promise and it's the same result. And again, time doesn't mean anything to God. So, is this helpful? We're at the end of the chapter and we're really early. I knew this would happen because I didn't have many verses to do, but I didn't want to start into the next hunk because it's a completely different thing. We go back to the narrative. Next week, unless they tell me that we can't have 111. I wish I had a barn in my backyard we could all meet in. Anyway, we're going to find out why Judas betrayed Jesus. And that's interesting. That's really... Have you heard me talk about that before? I'm sure you probably have, Susie. You've probably heard me say everything I'll ever say. But it's very helpful to know why Judas betrayed Jesus. And because everybody just thinks he was an evil dude. And at the bottom of the line of it is that he's just a regular person who got his feelings hurt. So we'll talk about that next week. You okay with leaving a little early tonight? Thank you. Please do pray for me because I have to come up with a sermon. And right now, can I tell you one more thing? After the class last week, on Thursday, I had my first Medicare doctor visit. And I don't know about how many of you have had your first one, but when they give you that test, that cognitive test, now I'm the first person to admit that I have hearing loss because I was a rock star. So I was in loud music a lot, and I do have hearing loss. But at my doctor's office, they wear masks. And when you have a mask on, and you're asking people questions that they're supposed to think about cognitively, and you can't see their lips, you don't know what they're saying. And when somebody asks me to tell them which of these three things is a triangle, I want to say, I said this to the girl, and for some reason, really young people now are talking way too fast for me. And I said, I've spent the morning parsing Greek, and you're asking me which of these three things is a triangle? She didn't think that was funny. Yeah, but what the whole process did was it made me question whether my mind is working because I couldn't understand a simple addition question that she asked me because I couldn't understand what she was saying. Finally, I figured it out, and I told her what 100 minus 3 is. But I have to say that it was so scary that it kind of put me over an edge about things. And then to find out that by my own mistake, I had prepared a really powerful sermon on Deuteronomy 14, and I was supposed to be talking about Luke 12. And I'm thinking, am I losing it? Seriously. Because I couldn't figure out why they had to ask me questions like that. But they ask us all that when we get to a certain age. I mean, it's just a part of the deal, I guess. Have they asked you those questions?
The first one's easy. Whether you do it 10 times, they get harder.
They get harder?
Yeah. I think I flunked the last one.
You still have your pilot's license, right?
They let me fly airplanes, but I can't pass the test.
But you can't add and subtract.
My favorite part was when they said, name as many animals as you can for the next minute.
Yeah, right.
Oh, gee.
And so I said, do you want domestic or feral? I guess there's a word for what I am, which I can't use in this setting. But it was just weird. It was weird. What? Oh, well, the problem is, do you guys remember when I got my shingle shot and the lady they gave me a shot and it went into my bursa and they blew my bursa up and I lost the use of my arm? Do you guys remember this at all? This happened like a year and a half. Yeah, Nancy, you remember. And I lost the use of my arm and the doctor's office would not admit that they'd done it. They blamed me. They said, you went and rode your bike after you got your shingle shot and you ruined your shoulder. Well, I knew that wasn't the case because I didn't have use of my arm. That was just ridiculous. And it hurt. I couldn't sleep. I was miserable. And finally they got me to a place to get an MRI on my shoulder, which took a long time. And the guy that read it goes, well, this is obvious. So somebody stuck a needle in your bursa and it's all blown up in there and it's probably going to hurt you for about 3 years at least. It's a mess. Well, guess who gave me the test? The girl that shot me in the arm. And when she came in, she has long hair, and she pulled her hair over her name tag. And I thought, wait a minute, I recognize you behind that mask. And I kept waiting for her to just move enough so that it would go. And finally I saw Tiffany, and I wanted to go. But I didn't. I'm a perfect example of a kind and patient man under most circumstances. Why am I telling you this? It was just awful. And you know what? I still can't sleep on my left side. Because she did real damage to me. But they sent me back my $40 copay.
Oh, for gosh sake.
That's it, yeah. There you go. Unfortunately, my primary care physician said, she did that to me too. I said, did you heal? This was just this last week. I said, did you heal? She said, yeah, after about a year and a half. I said, well, lucky you.
Maybe they took her off shot.
I'm speaking more in harsh tones than I was with them, actually. I was saying, well, lucky you. I didn't say, well, lucky you. Anyway. Next week, unless you hear from me, and there will be loud volumes of noise that we're not meeting because the foundation says no because they need that room. They say they need technology, so they're looking for another room in the building for technology. Bless their hearts. I hope they find it. They're good people. They're good people, and what they do is wonderful. But I want them out of that room next week at 7 o'clock, okay? You got it? All right. I'll see you next week. Thank you guys for being patient with me tonight. Yeah.
Okay. How many? What did you say? Just over 1,000. Okay.
You gave it to me? Oh, wait. Cindy, can you turn me off?